All right, it looks like we have a critical mass and others may be joining us today, so I'll kick us off. Welcome everyone to our resident and researcher webinar session today. We are going to be talking, as you can see, about the MiCorps program, a community science model for water protection. So we just have about 50 minutes, so I want to get right to our speaker today, but really quick, some business. So my name is Natalie Sampson. I co-lead the work of the Community Engagement Corps, which is part of the Michigan Center on Life Stage Environmental Exposures and Disease, also known as the M-LEEaD Center. And this is work supported by the National Institute for Environmental Health Sciences, a P30 grant. And I'll also just mention that specifically our Community Engagement Corps is really guided by our Action Board, which has members from various organizations across Metro Detroit, as well as state and local health departments, folks like the Eastside Community Network, Detroit Health Department, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, Sierra Club, We the People Detroit, Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice, Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation, Ecology Center, Trask Center, Green Door Initiative are all key players who really work with us to try to make sure that we've got communities, youth, policymakers, and researchers speaking to each other. So this series is really important to us because it's an opportunity to look at some of the priorities of our Action Board and of residents who are engaged in this process. So you'll learn about such a model today, but we have several other webinars that are on our YouTube channel that we'll put the link for on different topics. So we've covered gentrification, plastics, air quality, disaster preparedness, many, many others. So check it out in your free time. So we're going to get to our guests now. Please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat, and I will be tracking on that, and we'll make sure to leave a good 10 or 15 minutes to ask some questions after the presentation. So we are lucky to have Dr. Jo Latimore with us today. She is an aquatic ecologist and outreach specialist at Michigan State University in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. She works collaboratively with natural resource managers, communities, and the public to develop innovative solutions to complex challenges facing aquatic systems. So we're really excited, and this is sort of disciplinary for folks who are in environmental health and public health, kind of thinking about how do we learn from some of the folks who are coming from natural resource management, from ecology, because we know this is all very interconnected and has implications for environmental health and justice. So we're happy to have you here, Dr. Latimore, and I'm going to hand it off to you. And again, please remember, folks, to just use that Q&A, and we'll track on those questions. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Natalie, and thanks to the program for hosting me today. I'm always excited to talk about the MiCorps program. So again, I appreciate this opportunity. As Natalie mentioned, I am at Michigan State University. I am a faculty member in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife there, and also the director of our MSU Extension Center for Lakes and Streams, a network of educators and faculty across the state that work on lake and stream protection and supporting the watersheds, the landscapes that those lakes and streams occur in. And I'm also the director of the MiCorps program, which I'll be talking about with you today. I am lucky that I get to spend at least some of my time outdoors in the world, all across Michigan, visiting our lakes and streams, on boats, on foot, while snorkeling in a lot of different ways to help us better understand the status and the health of our lakes and streams, and also share that knowledge with residents of Michigan. So I count myself really lucky to be able to do that. And it won't be much news to all of you in the webinar today, but Michigan has some really great water resources. And Michigan communities rely on clean, abundant, and accessible water to support a broad range of ecosystem services. That includes recreation, our drinking water often comes from our surface waters, food through fishing and other means, and flood control. And lakes and rivers are part of Michigan's heritage, and they're part of our culture. And in addition, we know that a growing body of research is pointing to the critical role that blue spaces, like lakes and streams, everything from a little creek to Lake Superior, play in both of our individual and community mental and physical health and our overall well-being. However, with increasing human stresses, our waters can become polluted, degraded, and unusable. you can see in the upper left corner, we like to live by the water. And when we move in by the water, those shorelines don't look like they did before we lived there, right? You see a loss of trees, a loss of natural vegetation, and as a result, you often see a loss of the associated wildlife and fish and other birds and creatures that used to call that shoreline home. You can also see depicted there invasive species, algae blooms, flooding in urban areas in particular. That's actually the MSU campus. Our beloved Red Cedar River likes to take over parts of campus where it's not exactly appreciated sometimes. So when these changes happen, and they're usually human-driven, the services that these ecosystems provide to us, as well as their own intrinsic health, can suffer or be lost entirely, and that can also have impacts for public health. So we found that it can be useful to approach these challenges through a one water perspective, and you may have heard this before. The U.S. Water Alliance has spent a lot of time leading this perspective, and many others are building on it. But I think it's worth taking a look at this quote from kind of the foundational document that states that no matter who we are or where we live or what we do, water connects all of us. When we embrace the belief that water in all its forms has value, water in our lakes, our seas, our rivers and streams, also drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater, the full water life cycle can be optimized to build strong economies, vibrant communities, and healthy environments. We find that one water perspective that recognizes this, it recognizes that all waters are interconnected and interdependent and are part of what we can call the blue infrastructure of a community and the state, is a really useful approach. Such that a holistic perspective allows the recognition of the many benefits that healthy blue infrastructure can provide. For example, having sufficient quantity and connectivity of blue infrastructure, lakes, rivers, stormwater systems, that can absorb heat, it can cool the surrounding areas, it can offer flood protection. And further, having sufficient health and integrity of the components that make up our blue infrastructure in a community helps to ensure the quality of our drinking water and that we can swim in our water, we can catch fish that we can eat without risk from that water. So one approach to addressing these challenges, both the need to protect our healthy waters and to restore those that are degraded, is to expand water protection beyond professional silos, researchers, natural resource agency professionals, and so forth, and include the public, engage the public through community science. So public participation in scientific research, it's not a new concept, but it's certainly been taking off in recent years. And a key part of this is exactly what it sounds like. It's engaging members of the public that may not have that scientific training or professional background or have the title scientist after their name, engaging them in the process of scientific investigations. That can be asking the initial questions, forming hypotheses, actually collecting data or performing experiments, interpreting results. Any form of participation by the public, by non-professional scientists, can be considered public participation in scientific research. And this can go by many names: citizen science, volunteer monitoring, community science, lay monitoring. I've heard it used, many, many terms. And there's probably programs that you're familiar with, like eBird or iNaturalist. People who are in the birding community, many of them use eBird, the app, to report birds that they see and use the associated educational resources like Merlin and so forth to help you learn what that bird is. And my goodness, the data that's generated by hobbyist birders all over the world is incredible. And the same goes for programs like iNaturalist, which is probably the world's largest contribution spot for people to post pictures and records of anything alive that they see in the world. Everything from a fish to a plant to a flower to a tree. All of those data can go into iNaturalist, and the other users can help people identify what they're seeing or confirm those identifications. So public participation in scientific research, community science, has grown rapidly since the mid-20th century, and that expansion may be attributed to a combination of factors. One of those is likely environmental tragedies, right? When an oil spill happens, for example, in your community, that impacts the public, and the public is there on the ground, and they're collecting data just by watching what's going on around them. And so we have increased recognition that the fact that there's people there that can report what they're seeing, report their observations is incredibly valuable, especially in times when we may have limited budgets at our government agencies and so forth to send staff to those places, get the scientists mobilized and out in the field. There may be extensive travel they have to do to get to that site of that problem. So tragedies has definitely, unfortunately, helped the citizen science movement. Also, shifts in policymaking structures. We are increasingly recognizing the value as policymakers of public input and engagement. Making policy in a vacuum without public engagement is a recipe for failure, so engaging people with policymaking as it includes scientific data that they may help collect is really valuable. Also, society has become more affluent overall. We have more free time for hobbies like birding, like looking at the quality of the water in our local lake or stream. We also have really powerful computers and cameras in our pockets pretty much all the time. So we can submit observations, take photos, and so forth instantly wherever we are in the world. As I hinted to before, another reason we're seeing more public participation in scientific research is dwindling government budgets for funding basic monitoring as well as research. And so in these kinds of times and scarcity, we figure out other ways to do it. And we recognize that the public can be an incredibly useful partner in these scientific endeavors. So those are all important aspects. And there's even now a professional society. It's been around for several years now, the Association for Advancing Participatory Sciences. They hold an annual conference. This is elevating public participation in scientific research to a truly academic and professional endeavor. People are taking it very seriously now, and I think that's very exciting, because in the lake and stream world, actually, not as long as birding, but similarly, we've been active in engaging volunteers and collecting data for many years in this field. So our model here in Michigan, and what I'm going to focus on for the rest of my presentation today, is the Michigan Clean Water Corps, or MiCorps for short. For the past 51 years, Michigan community science volunteers have collected ecological data on lakes and streams through MiCorps. These data represent one of the richest sources of information on the health of Michigan's waters, both spatially and temporally, and are scientifically valid thanks to program oversight, volunteer training, and data quality control processes provided by Michigan State University and our program sponsor, the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE. And through MiCorps, we engage the public in collecting critically needed and scientifically valid data about the health of our lakes and our streams. We train the volunteers in the necessary technical protocols and subject all steps of monitoring to rigorous quality assurance process. And annually, our MiCorps volunteers can collect data at twice as many stream sites and as much as 7 times as many inland lakes, and at more frequent intervals than our state natural resources agencies. And they recognize that, and that is why they support the program and provide the funding for it. It makes it crucial, our program, to understanding the health of our waterways here in Michigan. And these data are all freely available through our MiCorps data exchange on our website, which I'll share at the end of the presentation. We conservatively estimate that about 5,000 people volunteer each year for MiCorps activities, including our stream monitoring volunteers and our lake monitoring volunteers. And with a contribution of at least 26,000 volunteer hours annually, fun fact, we figure that the volunteer value of their efforts over the last 5 years alone is about $4.5 million. So I've spent some time thinking about how these community science projects can benefit both the scientists and managers and the participants. And our position at MSU and MSU Extension kind of puts us at the interface of academia and local communities, which positions us really well to be involved in community science projects like MiCorps. So for example, what you can see here is a list of some of the challenges that our scientists and managers of Michigan lakes and streams face, and how the MiCorps programs helps them meet those challenges. As I hinted to before, just getting to the site to collect information and observations can be a challenge, but our volunteers usually live on or very close to the water bodies, and they also have access to private or remote sites, like lakes that don't have a public access site, for example, that may be challenging for professionals to get to. Also, because the volunteers are local, they can sample more places and more frequently than professionals can. And scientists and managers, again, I hinted at this before, limited budgets. We have limited budgets to collect data about the health of our lakes and streams, and by engaging volunteers who aren't free, make that clear, we definitely have to invest in these programs with funding and staff and support, but they are less expensive than paying hundreds of professionals full-time wages to collect the same data. And then maybe one of the most important, but sometimes not mentioned as often, and the practical benefits of community science programs like MiCorps is that through participation, we are building public support for freshwater research and management. Often that's hard. Are our lakes and streams a priority? I think in Michigan, we often hear that absolutely, we love our water, it's very important to us, but we also, as a state, as a society, tend to think that they're in pretty good shape already, so why should we invest any resources in them? If we involve members of the community, as we do in collecting data, it definitely raises awareness of the actual health and status of our lakes and streams, and helps build support for continuing to protect that blue infrastructure that we all rely on. There are also challenges that our volunteers may face in their communities, and often this is what motivates them to get involved. They may want to collect data, but they don't know how to begin. We're professionals, we can teach you how to do it. We provide a standardized protocol and methods and approaches for collecting the data. We provide a database that can hold the data and make sure it's safe and sound for, posterity and accessible at all times. We can help build and assure the validity of their data because often, as you might expect, volunteer collected data are often subject to a higher level of scrutiny than data that are collected by professionals. And that makes some sense. So to address that and ensure that our data that our volunteers collect is of high quality, we have a lot of quality control steps worked in through our procedures, through going out in the field with our volunteers, all the training process that we do, and the way that our database works. We also assist participants in understanding the meaning of the data that they're collecting and raising their awareness of what kinds of management options are available to them. If they're concerned about, okay, how do we use this data to either protect or restore our lake or stream, we can help them with that as well. So as I mentioned before, this is a partnership program. MSU does not do this alone. Eagle has a contract with MSU to administer MiCorps, and then we subcontract with the Huron River Watershed Council based in Ann Arbor and the Michigan Lakes and Streams Association, a statewide organization, and together these four organizations comprise the team behind MiCorps. And we have found that this teamwork structure has worked very well for many years behind MiCorps. We have people representing different sectors of water quality protection. We have academia, nonprofits, and state agencies all involved, and that partnership really brings the strengths of all those perspectives to the table. MiCorps was created to augment the water quality data that Eagle collects. So again, Eagle is heavily invested in this program, and they are responsible for water resources management and protection in Michigan. And they can only collect so much data about our 11,000 lakes and our 35,000 miles of streams in Michigan. And so MiCorps was created by the state to augment those efforts. So as such, we have to ensure that the data is of high quality, that it's scientifically valid. And so to produce such high quality data that's usable by the state and also by our participants in their communities, we educate our volunteers about water quality. We provide training and technical assistance and support that they need to succeed in their data collection efforts. The MiCorps program has 3 programs under its umbrella. We have our Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program that's focused on our inland lakes. We have a volunteer stream monitoring program that focuses on streams that are wadeable, that is not too deep, that you can go in a pair of waders and wade around and collect samples. And we also have a volunteer stream cleanup program, which I won't talk about a lot here, but we do offer grants to municipalities to host litter cleanups on streams across the state. So first, I'll talk a little bit about our volunteer stream monitoring program. Volunteers that participate in the program work with local organizations, such as watershed councils or conservation districts around Michigan, to monitor stream quality by examining aquatic invertebrate community and the stream habitat. And invertebrates are really important. So the insects and other invertebrates like clams and crayfish that live in our streams and rivers, not only are they really delicious fish food for the fish that live in those waters, but they're also really excellent bioindicators of stream quality and stream health. Certain insects are very sensitive to pollution and habitat loss, while others are very tolerant. So by looking at what assortment of invertebrates we find in the stream, we can assign a score, basically a status to those streams. And collecting invertebrates is something that is fairly easy for volunteers to learn to do. And so it works out very nicely. We support, through MiCorps, stream monitoring organization leaders and the volunteers by providing training and support. And we also award grants to local organizations to create and maintain their stream volunteer networks around the state. The Volunteer Stream Monitoring Program was launched in 1998, and since then, thousands of volunteers have collected data from streams in every Michigan county, and currently we're working in 42 different counties across the state through 30 different organizations. Here you can see a map of our stream sampling locations across the state, reaching back to 2005. And over the past 20 years, we've awarded almost $900,000 in grants to 61 different organizations. And then these organizations that get our grants, they partner with other organizations like paddling and fishing organizations, scouts, churches, conservation groups, and as well as thousands of unaffiliated individuals who just show up to volunteer. And each of our programs varies in size. Some have 10 volunteers, some have over 300 volunteers each year. But in the end, we're talking about tens of thousands and maybe over 100,000 people who have been reached with opportunities to combine scientific study with environmental education. And there's some other kind of impressive numbers there on the screen, but a couple that I'll draw your attention to is that we've surveyed over 820 locations, every little dot on there, and we sample them a lot. If you look at the number of data points for each location on that map, on average, each spot has been surveyed for more than 14 times over the last 20 years, and many of them are sampled twice a year, every year. So lots of data being collected over space and time. And just in the last 3 years, our volunteers have picked out of streams and counted nearly 200,000 individual invertebrates. So these are little mayfly larvae and dragonfly larvae and crayfish and clams and all sorts of creatures that are helping us understand the health of our streams. And each member stream monitoring organization then that we support then tracks the long-term results of monitoring in their regions. They use that data to develop maps of the health of the streams in their areas, watershed management plans that are critical for water resource protection across the state. They inform community planning decisions and guide water quality protection efforts. This is just a snippet from a recent report from the Watershed Center in Grand Traverse Bay up in northwest lower Michigan, and a number of their monitoring sites. And you can see, based on the color coding, you have, sometimes not surprising, the best health sites are the ones in the upstream areas. And if you get closer to urban areas like the city of Traverse City and Elk Rapids, you may see that you start to get going from excellent sites to more good or fair or even fairly poor sites. And that data is incredibly useful, and this Watershed Center has used that data to secure grants and build partnerships and bring this information to local decision makers to inform conservation efforts across the region. And this is just one example. These kinds of programs are happening all over Michigan. The other key monitoring component of our program is the Cooperative Lakes Monitoring Program, or CLMP. This is focused on inland lakes. We don't monitor Great Lakes through this program. Those are a little big to take your pontoon out on and sample. So our volunteers in the CLMP, they monitor water quality, shoreline habitat, and invasive and native aquatic plants to document changes in lake health over time. And this is the older piece of MiCorps. It's been in existence since 1974. So last year was our 50-year anniversary, and we have no signs of slowing down. In fact, we're growing. And we are the second oldest volunteer lake monitoring program in the United States. Minnesota beat us by 1 year, darn it, but we're the second oldest, and we're still very proud of that. We provide our volunteers with training and ongoing expert support, and they can choose from a whole suite of data to collect, water quality parameters and shoreline and nearshore habitat information, just a whole collection, and we'll look at a couple of those here in a moment. Again, stats, here's the locations of all the lakes that have been monitored over the last 51 years. This is 1,072 of our lakes have data in our database collected by volunteers. We've got 13 of them that have more than 40 years of consistent collected data. So talk about dedicated volunteers. In some cases, this is the same volunteer who's been doing it for half their lifetime. And in other cases, it's passed along from one volunteer to the next over time. In just the last 5 years, we've had 455 different lakes in the program in 63 different counties. And our volunteers have found over 300 occurrences of invasive plants that they've reported. They've collected over 13,000 algae samples. And this year that we're wrapping up right now is our record year. We had 337 lakes participate this year with well over 500 volunteers each year. The simplest monitoring program in the CLMP is the measurement of water transparency with a device called a Secchi disc. And you can see a Secchi disc here, this black and white 8-inch disc that the volunteer will lower into the water and simply measure how deep they can see it before it disappears. This is an approach that's been around for hundreds of years. It was developed in Europe many years ago, and is probably the most common monitoring approach for both professionals and volunteers to look at lake water quality and lake health. And I've got some data here. Just, not my goal was not to overwhelm with charts and graphs, but I can't give a science-related talk without at least one. So this is data from Fremont Lake in Newaygo County in central Michigan, located right here, kind of in west central Michigan. And what you're seeing here is both spring and summer data, spring in the top panel and summer in the bottom. And you see the years across the top. And what you can do is kind of picture each graph as a cross-section of the lake. So this zero line up here, that's the surface of the lake. And we're going down in feet, down to 25 feet or so here on the y-axis. And so what each of these data points is showing you is what the average Secchi depth, or how deep they could see that disc in the water on average that year, that summer. And so it doesn't take long to realize back in the 70s and early 80s, Fremont Lake was pretty cloudy. It was very murky. You could only see this black and white disc down a few feet from the surface. And then as time went by, the water got clearer and clearer, so you could see it down over 20 feet some years. And this was the result of some really important changes. The Clean Water Act came in and started to have an effect in the 70s and early 80s. We saw that. There was also changes in the way that wastewater was managed in this city. Fremont, you might know, is the home of Gerber Baby Foods, and before there were rules on how the waste from processing plants like Gerber were managed, a lot of the organic waste from that baby food manufacturing ended up in Fremont Lake, and all of that organic matter caused a lot of algae growth, a lot. And now that that's not happening anymore, things have gotten better. So even though there was some gaps in the volunteer record here of collecting data, we can definitely still document improvement and see those signatures of those changes in the way that the lake was monitored and managed. Aquatic plants are another really key piece of lake ecosystems. A lot of people disparage the seaweed in their lakes. They don't like the weeds in the lake. They want them removed. However, they're really important parts of the lake ecosystem and are necessary for lake health and to support a healthy fishery and to keep the water clean, even though we do sometimes see invasive plants move in and they can be problematic. So we have volunteers involved with collecting plants from points around their lake and helping to map and figure out what's growing in their lake and how healthy their plant community is. And in particular, many of our volunteers are really interested in the invasive species. And starry stonewort is an invasive macroalgae that grows like a plant and has been moving up from the south of Michigan up into more northern counties. And a couple of years ago, we did a concerted effort with lakes in Oakland County to encourage people who lived on lakes there to, monitor their lakes by using one of these sampling rigs you can see on the slide and snagging plants and seeing what they found. And many of the volunteers that year found starry stonewort in their lake. In fact, over 21 new occurrences, new lakes were added to the invaded list as a result of those volunteers going out there and looking. And none of those, more than half of them actually, all of those 21 lakes did not know that plant had invaded their lakes yet. And so knowing that gave them information they could use to embark on a management and a management process. So really important information. It was also important for communities outside of the lakes that found that they had this invasive species, because the number one way that invasive plants are moved from one lake to another is on trailered boats that move from one lake to another. And as you may know, in Oakland County, there's a lot of lakes and they're really close to each other. And so if you go into one lake with your boat and you think it's a little weedy and you're not having much fun out there, well, you may just take that weed covered boat to the next lake down the road and you've just moved that invasive species without knowing it. And so this information has really helped Oakland County and other communities better understand invasive species issues and how to manage them locally instead of waiting for the chance happening that a state biologist or a university researcher finds it in their lake. The last example I'll show you from the lake monitoring program is our Score the Shore program. And Score the Shore, I'm really proud of this one because it came directly from us reaching out to the volunteers and saying, what additional data do you want about your lake? And as I showed right at the top of my presentation, some of our lakes are in pretty rough shape because of all the residential development around them, urban development that has really altered the health of those shorelines. What used to be forests or grasslands or natural beaches and wetlands has largely been turned to lawns and seawalls, which are not good for the lake's health and the health of the organisms that live there, water quality, and so forth. And so we've been doing a fair amount of education across Michigan to lakefront homeowners about the importance of maintaining natural shorelines. And so they said, hey, you keep telling us about these natural shorelines and how important they are. Is there a way that we can collect data to see what the quality of our shoreline is on our lake? So in response to those needs, we created Score the Shore, which is an opportunity for volunteers. You can see them clipboard in hand there, right? What they're doing is they are assessing the health of their shoreline by answering some questions, a questionnaire basically that we developed that applies to 1,000-foot sections of the lake. They're kind of arbitrarily set up 1,000-foot sections. And we did that so that the volunteers weren't just picking on maybe one particular homeowner or one yard that just was particularly unnatural. Instead, it's broadened out into 1,000-foot sections. And they collect this information, which really gives them an idea of how natural or unnatural their shoreline is on their lake and opportunities for improvement. One example, Deer Lake, again in Oakland County, they use the data from their Score the Shore efforts to make this map that showed that On this end of the lake, they had good quality shoreline. You can see there's a lot of trees and forests in this area. And then down where you see the dash lines, all except for this little segment here, these were ones that scored in the fair category. And there were key indicators that they found that they were scoring poorly on. You can see erosion happening even in this aerial photo here along section 3, where there's erosion coming off this road, making its way into the water. And there was other concerns as well. Well, the Lake Association was able to bring this information and this data to their local planning commission and actually influence a decision about a development that was proposed for right in this area of the lake, the one good section on this less lower quality end of the lake. And because they could show that they collected the data scientifically and kind of had the backing of the MiCorps program behind it, and it wasn't just grumpy neighbors, but actually people with data that showed up at this meeting, the Planning Commission adjusted their plans and their recommendations for that development and made it a much more lake-friendly project, which is really exciting to see. As you might imagine, there's definitely challenges that come along with volunteer engagement and public participation in science. One of those is actually recruiting volunteers and keeping them involved. Our goal is having a long-term monitoring program, and while one day worth of data is useful, it's not nearly as useful as having years of data that you can look back at. So we do a lot of different efforts to recruit volunteers, both ourselves and through various partners like the Michigan Lakes and Streams Association and other organizations that may be looking for either for volunteer opportunities or are interested in lake or stream health. We make sure we communicate the value of the program. Most people, when they volunteer for a program, they want to feel good about what they're doing. They want to know that it's making a difference. So we make sure that we communicate about our program. And we keep our volunteers informed about how their data are being used and ways that they can get involved and other opportunities that we have. And we offer many different roles. Not everyone wants to jump into a creek in muck boots and scoop around and look for bugs. Not everybody wants to do that. So we make sure that we know that we share that there are many opportunities to get involved at different levels of commitment, different levels of training needed, and so forth. So even if you're just curious, you can show up for one day and help out. But if you really want to dive in and become a volunteer leader or something like that, we offer those opportunities as well. Another challenge that I've alluded to before is data credibility. Volunteer data, as we know, as we would expect, is held to a higher level of scrutiny than data collected by professionals. I've had people push back against our program and our data when I've presented it before, saying, why would I trust data collected by a citizen scientist? I wouldn't let a citizen dentist work on my teeth. And I understand that perspective, especially if you're not familiar with, the process and the work that goes behind established programs like MiCorps. We make sure that we have a publicly available quality assurance project plan that goes through every step of what we do to ensure that we catch any mistakes, errors that might be happening by our volunteers. We have protocols that are volunteer friendly and easy to understand. We provide consistent training and refresher training for our volunteers and our program leaders. And when we receive our data and it's ready to be added into our database, we have many opportunities to review that. Our computer system will catch things that are, if somebody reports that, the lake was 900 degrees, we know that's wrong and the database won't allow that data to be entered, for example. And we will reject data that aren't collected correctly. If a bottle of water that's coming in for analysis is supposed to be frozen and it comes in and it's not frozen, we have to reject that sample. And it can be hard to have to be the one to tell the volunteer that we threw out a sample that they spent time collecting, but it's also a learning opportunity and a teaching moment. So we take advantage of that. And we also continually engage professionals outside of our team in the program to give us feedback and ideas on how to improve the program, how to make the data more useful for them, whether they're researchers, managers, natural resources professionals. We engage them. We encourage them to use our data and write papers with them using our data and so forth. So data credibility is always a challenge, but we've come up with a number of ways to address that. So, I'll wrap up with some of the benefits that I really see, and some of this again will be reiterating. But we really think that this community science model for water protection is one that is valuable for Michigan and one that we're excited to be able to continue to offer. We generate data with our volunteers, and that data supports action both at the individual level. Maybe someone does something a little differently in their waterfront yard because of Score the Shore data that they saw. Communities may change the way they manage their landscapes or change their zoning and planning. Organizations like Eagle or the DNR will incorporate our data into their decisions about where they might stock fish or where they might do a river cleanup. Our program has enhanced and continues to enhance public understanding of both the health of our blue infrastructure and also how that science works. They get to be behind the scenes and see how the professionals do what they do. It's built incredibly valuable relationships between the volunteers, people in the community, and those of us who are professionals in the water resources world. We are working together side by side on these programs. And so even if they have a question for me that has nothing to do with their monitoring, they see something strange in their lake and they send me a photo, they know who to send it to, right? They've worked with members of our team. They've met people from MSU, from Eagle, from DNR. They've met those people, and they're not just a email address with no face attached to it. And then finally, public support, again, for science-based conservation and honestly for funding to keep the money flowing. People vote for programs that they support and understand, and so the public engagement piece is important for us there too. So with that, I'll wrap up. Here on the screen, you can see www.micorps.net. That's where you can go and see all about what we do. Our webpage has information about all of our volunteer programs, including how you can get involved. So if this sounds like fun and something you might want to try out, you'll see information on there on how to get involved as a volunteer too. You can also find our data there under the data exchange, view all the data that's been collected since way back in 1974. It's all available there to view and download. If you're just somebody who likes to play with big data sets, we can help you out there. So at this time, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Latimore. This just the scale and the scope and the number of volunteers, the numbers you shared, and also the stories you shared have been really helpful. And there are a few questions here. I think a couple of lines of thinking I'm seeing. One question specifically is asking about sort of private use of water, specifically referencing the Nestle Corporation. But I'm curious, just as we talk about our Great Lakes, as we talk about, folks coming here and extracting for various uses. We know we've had a lot of conversations about data centers lately, how that's showing up in the program, in your work. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, great. That's a great perspective and something we do think about a lot. Water is used in a lot of ways, and some of it is consumptive, where the quantity of water may be reduced, water bottling plants and so forth, major pumping and irrigation processes, but also water quality, right? The condition of the water, the temperature of the water, those kinds of things. When the streams flow high and low may change through dam operations or, utility use and that kind of thing. And so, while we're not out there directly measuring those things, one thing that we consistently don't do and purposely don't do is we don't do kind of issue reactive monitoring. It's not, oh, a bottling plant just went in, let's get a bunch of volunteers out there to monitor what's going on. We're looking for long-term data. So ideally, we were out in those rivers before that plant showed up, for example. So then we can have before and after data. But we do have several of our programs that can show signatures of impacts like that. On the stream side, both the invertebrate collections and the habitat assessment can show us if stream flows are changing. What we often see when there's increased use of water in a watershed, the stream's flow data data will change. You'll see, instead of it being consistent, kind of same levels of stream flow throughout the year, you'll see more dramatic changes where the stream's in flood stage and then drought stage, flood stage, drought stage. A lot of invertebrates can't handle that kind of energy, that changing system, and so we'll see the loss of some of those more sensitive invertebrates from those collections. Downstream from those uses. We'll also see changes in habitat because that kind of rapid changing of stream level can lead to erosion along the stream banks. It becomes unstable, and so we also document that. Our volunteers can document that. On the lake side of things, we don't directly monitor lake level, but we do monitor the temperature profiles and oxygen profiles. And that's one of the areas that's been really of interest for those following the concerns about large quantity water withdrawals in Michigan. So withdrawals of water, again, through large agricultural wells, but also bottling plants or other kind of industrial uses of water that's taking a lot of water out of our lake systems. What that often does is it changes the temperature of the water, both in streams and lakes, depending on how that water is drawn out. And you may be aware that many of our fish populations are very sensitive to water temperature, especially in northern Michigan. Cool or even cold water is required for the health of trout, of salmon, of cisco. Other cold water species really need that. And our data showing the profile of oxygen availability and temperature in our lakes can sometimes pick up on signatures of change in that area. And those also, of course, there's implications of climate change on those measurements as well. So as is with most scientific pursuits, there's often a lot of variables to tease out, but we can witness some of those signatures in both our stream and our lake monitoring.
Great, thank you. So the other questions I'm going to sort of combine here in our last minutes together, but really, as you can imagine, folks listening in who are coming from a public health perspective are thinking about limited resources, shifts in priorities, what our local, state, federal, public agencies are able to do. And so there's questions about how others might use this model when it comes to things like community health issues. So for one example, someone talked about aging infrastructure and lead pipes. Could we think about how folks are, dealing with those issues or other types of issues where we think, agencies aren't able to step in? And so what can that look like? So lessons we might take away, obviously you mentioned some of the challenges that probably apply, but have you seen examples of this? What could that look like?
Yeah, really great. I think one way to kind of incredibly and almost comedically oversimplify community science programs is to think of every volunteer as a sensor. Right? That's a little piece of equipment that's out there and can collect data for you, right? It's much more than that, of course. Each of our volunteers can contribute so much more, but we often, when we're looking at issues like aging infrastructure, like water quality declines, those kinds of things, we often wish we had more data, we had more information, maybe just to make the case that we need funding for these programs, right? Sometimes that's the issue, like to even get a program off the ground, we need money. Oh, well, to get money, you need to have data. Well, we need money to get the data, right? And it becomes what seems almost intractable sometimes. But if we think of our communities as all having the capacity, community members have the capacity to collect data in one way or another. Maybe it's just a casual observation that they can submit somehow. Maybe it's filling out a questionnaire. Maybe it's sending in a water sample from their faucet, from their tap. There's taking pictures of things that you need pictures of. There's so many ways to engage people, and we have found that people are interested. People want to contribute, especially, issues that they care about. And when it comes to public health, there's a lot of public care. Even if there isn't always funding and resources available, the public is concerned about a lot of issues. And if given the opportunity to participate in a way that doesn't overburden them, and lets the and is clear to them that they could be making a real difference in the issue, we find that people will step up and help. And one of the great benefits of the growth in public participation in scientific research over the last few years, many years actually at this point, is that there's lots of programs, not just ours, lots of programs across Michigan, across the country and the world that are learning a lot of lessons about what works and what doesn't. And so that information is out there. I've touched on a little bit of that, but I would definitely encourage, if anyone was thinking about, how could we engage or incorporate community science into our efforts, definitely connect with other organizations that are doing community science, even if it's in a different discipline. There's a lot of common lessons that have been learned about how to do that. And what we often find also from a local perspective here in Michigan, people who volunteer for one thing often are interested in volunteering in other things. And so we've had recruitment of volunteers where, there might be a new program getting off the ground and they'll reach out to us and say, hey, can you share this opportunity with your volunteers? They may be interested. And, I think you'll find that most programs and program leaders will be more than happy to help you with that. In those cases, because we all see that value of engaging the public in these scientific endeavors, and I think there's a lot of untapped potential out there for further engagement of the public.
Those seem like some great final words. There are some more questions, but I'll try to connect you to these questions after today. But thank you, everyone, for joining. You'll see in the chat information about our next residents and researchers next week that's focused on artificial turf and children's environmental health. So warm thank you to Dr. Latimore and everyone who joined today. This was really helpful, and what a powerful example. Thank you.